I don't care who you think you are. That card is a fake, and your account is frozen. The man's voice was loud, a performative sort of authority for the half-dozen people in the lobby. He tapped a well-manicured finger on the laminated ID sitting on the marble countertop. Now, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The lobby of Patriot Trust Bank was a cavern of polished marble and hushed reverence for money. Sunlight struggled through the tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air-conditioned chill. Behind the teller line, a young woman with wide, frightened eyes watched the manager, Mark Renshaw, her hands frozen above her keyboard. In the short, socially distanced line, a college-aged kid slowly raised his phone, its camera lens a tiny, dark eye. The woman at the counter, Dr. Althea Vance, did not move. She stood with a stillness that seemed to absorb the man's aggression, her posture unshakable, her hands resting calmly on the handle of her leather satchel. She simply looked at him, her gaze clear and direct. What he didn't know, what none of them could possibly know, was that the fake ID he was about to theatrically drop into the small bin beside his station was not just a piece of plastic. It was a key, and he had just handed her the reason to turn it. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning had begun with the familiar scent of dark roast coffee and the quiet hum of the old house waking up. For Dr. Althea Vance, the first 21 days of her transitional leave were a gift of time, a rare, unstructured expanse she intended to fill with small, meaningful tasks. Her appointment was confirmed, the background checks complete, the announcement scheduled for the 1st of next month. Until then, she was simply Althea, a citizen, a mother, a widow tidying the loose ends of a life well lived. That was the first thing she noticed every morning. The light. It spilled over the oak floors of her small, meticulously kept home in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood of Washington, D.C., the kind of neighborhood where roots ran deeper than the pavement. She sat at her kitchen table, a simple, sturdy piece of maple her late husband, General David Vance, had bought at a flea market 40 years ago. In her hands was a steaming mug, the ceramic warm against her palms. Outside, the city was a distant roar. Inside, there was only peace. She had a list. Not a digital list on a glowing screen, but a physical one, written in her neat, academic script on a small, cream-colored notepad. Today's entry was simple: close Dad's savings account. It was the last financial tie to him, an account he'd opened as a young lieutenant at the downtown branch of what was then called First National Fidelity, now Patriot Trust Bank. The balance was trivial, less than $200, but the act of closing it felt monumental. It was a final, quiet turning of a page. Althea had learned a long time ago that discipline was a muscle. You exercised it in small ways so it would be there for you in the large ones. Her husband had taught her that. His dress shoes, spit shined to a black mirror finish, still stood by the door, a silent testament to a life of order and readiness. Every Sunday, she polished them. It was a ritual, a conversation with his memory. Today was Tuesday, a day for errands. She dressed with purpose. A pair of gray tailored trousers, a simple silk shell, and a navy blue blazer. Her hair, silvering at the temples, was pulled back in a neat chignon. She was a woman who commanded respect not by demanding it, but by inhabiting her own dignity so completely that it became the climate of any room she entered. She slipped the necessary documents into her leather satchel: David's death certificate, the notarized executor paperwork, her own government-issued identification, and the small, unassuming bank card that would soon be the focus of so much contempt. It was her new credentials, not yet public. An ID for the Federal Reserve. She hadn't intended to use it, but had it with her as part of the new packet of materials she was supposed to carry. The drive downtown took 22 minutes. She counted the traffic lights. Red, green, yellow, a rhythm. She parked in a garage 2 blocks from the bank, the concrete cool and smelling of damp earth and exhaust fumes. The walk was pleasant. The late morning sun was warm on her face, and the city hummed with a vibrant, chaotic energy she usually observed from the quiet heights of academia or policy meetings. Today she was in it, another face in the crowd. The bank was an old building, a fortress of commerce from a bygone era. Heavy brass doors, a soaring ceiling, floors that clicked and echoed with every footstep. It was designed to make the individual feel small, reverent before the institution of capital. Althea felt the weight of dozens of eyes as she walked to the single open teller window. There was one person ahead of her, a young man fumbling with a deposit slip. She waited patiently, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. The young teller, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, had a nervous energy. Her name tag read Maria. She smiled, a quick, practiced flash of teeth. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to close an account, please," Althea said, her voice calm and even. She passed the old passbook and the executor documents through the slot. Maria's brow furrowed as she typed at her terminal. She looked at the screen, then back at the papers. "This is a very old account, ma'am. I think I need my manager for this." She seemed apologetic, as if she had failed a test. "That's perfectly fine," Althea said. Maria pressed a button, and a moment later, a man emerged from a glass-walled office at the back. This was Mark Renshaw. He walked with a proprietary air, his suit a little too tight across the shoulders, his tie a slash of aggressive red against a stark white shirt. He did not make eye contact with Althea. He spoke only to the teller. "What's the problem, Maria?" His tone was one of weary impatience. "It's a deceased account closure, Mr. Renshaw. It's complicated." He sighed, a theatrical puff of air. He turned to Althea for the first time. His eyes, a pale, flat blue, swept over her, from her shoes to her face, in a quick, dismissive appraisal. The kind of look that doesn't see a person, but categorizes a problem. "ID," he said. "Not a question, a command." Althea passed her driver's license through the slot. He glanced at it, then at the paperwork. "Althea Vance," he said, mispronouncing her name slightly. "And this is David Vance." "He was my husband," she said. Renshaw tapped at Maria's keyboard, his movements jerky and impatient. "The signature on this executor form doesn't look right." He held it up, comparing it to something on the screen that Althea couldn't see. "We have to be very careful about fraud. We see it all the time." "I assure you, the documents are in order," Althea said, her voice remaining perfectly level. "They were prepared by my attorney and notarized. Attorneys make mistakes. Notaries can be forged." He pushed the papers back toward her. "I can't verify this. There's nothing more I can do." The finality in his voice was a door slamming shut. Althea took a slow, deliberate breath. This was a test of the muscle. "Discipline. Is there another form of identification you would accept?" she asked. A flicker of something moved behind his eyes. Annoyance. Perhaps a sliver of enjoyment. "It's not the ID, it's the paperwork. It's all suspect." That was the word he used. Suspect. It hung in the air between them, thick and ugly. Althea made a decision. She reached into her satchel and retrieved the new identification. It was plain, with the seal of the Federal Reserve System. She hadn't wanted to use it. It felt like pulling rank in a situation that shouldn't require it. But the man had left her no other path. "Perhaps this will suffice," she said, sliding it across the counter. Renshaw picked it up. He held it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were something distasteful. He squinted at the photo, then at her. He read the name. He read the title below it. Chair, Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. A strange, tight smile stretched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "You've got to be kidding me," he scoffed. He looked around the lobby, a performer checking for his audience. The young man with the phone was still there. An elderly black gentleman who had just walked in, Mr. Henderson, stood by the door, watching with a kind of weary resignation. "This is a joke, right?" Renshaw said, his voice rising. "You come in here with these flimsy papers, and this novelty ID?" He laughed, a short, barking sound. "The chair of the Fed? You? That's a good 1 inch." Althea said nothing. She simply watched him. She felt the humiliation the way one feels a change in barometric pressure. It was a physical presence in the room, not from his words, from the casual cruelty of his disbelief, the utter inability to see her as anything other than a fraud. That was when he did it. With a final, contemptuous flick of his wrist, he tossed her Federal Reserve ID into the small, plastic trash bin next to Maria's terminal. It landed with a soft clatter against a discarded receipt. "I don't care who you think you are," he said, his voice now a low growl, leaning forward over the counter. "That card is a fake, and your account is frozen pending a fraud investigation." He pointed a finger toward the door. "Now, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The silence that followed lasted about 3 seconds. Maria looked like she might faint. The young man's phone was now held high and steady. Mr. Henderson by the door simply shook his head, a slow, sad motion. Althea's gaze dropped to the trash bin. She saw the corner of her ID, her face staring up from a bed of garbage. Then she looked back at Renshaw. She didn't need anyone to tell her what had happened. It wasn't about a signature. It wasn't about a bank account. That was the real thing. It was about his power and her presence, and in his world, the two could not coexist. Security, Renshaw barked, not looking away from her. Escort this woman out. A uniformed guard, a man older than Althea with kind, tired eyes, approached hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft. Althea nodded once, a gesture of concession that was not a surrender. She gathered her papers and her satchel, her movements slow and deliberate. She did not look at Renshaw again. As the guard walked beside her toward the heavy brass doors, she could feel the manager's stare on her back, hot and triumphant. The door clicked shut behind her, and she was standing on the sun-drenched sidewalk, the city's noise rushing back in to fill the void. She stood there for a moment, breathing. 1, 2, 3. She had 20 days of leave remaining. She let herself feel it. The anger, the profound disrespect, for exactly 90 seconds. Then, she started walking back to her car. The work had just begun. The drive home was a study in control. Althea kept her hands steady on the leather-wrapped steering wheel, her knuckles not quite white. She drove the speed limit precisely. Her gaze was fixed on the road ahead, but her mind was replaying the scene in the bank with a cold, analytical clarity. The flat blue of Renshaw's eyes, the smirk, the flick of his wrist, the soft clatter of the ID card hitting the trash. Each detail was an exhibit, filed away in a mental folder. She felt the anger, a low, hot coil in her gut. It was a righteous anger, the kind that clarifies rather than confuses. She had learned a long time ago that rage was a fire. Left untended, it consumed you. Channeled, it could power a furnace. She pulled into her driveway, the crunch of gravel under the tires the only sound. The house was just as she'd left it, quiet and serene. It felt like a sanctuary from a world that had just reminded her, in the most brutish way possible, that sanctuaries were illusions. Dignity was not a fortress. It was something you carried with you, and sometimes you had to fight to keep it from being dragged through the mud. She walked into the kitchen and set her satchel on the table. For a moment, she just stood there, her hand resting on the smooth, worn leather. She could feel the shape of the documents inside, the weight of the injustice. She allowed herself another 60 seconds. She closed her eyes and let the full force of the humiliation wash over her. The feeling of being dismissed, of being rendered invisible, of being treated as a liar and a criminal in a public space. She let it fill her, a bitter tide. Then, just as deliberately, she let it recede. The feeling was a fact, an event. It was not her identity. When she opened her eyes, the emotion was gone, replaced by a crystalline resolve. That wasn't just an insult. That was a systemic failure manifested in one man. And you don't fix a broken machine by yelling at one of its gears. You dismantle it. Her phone buzzed. It was her son, David. His contact photo showed him smiling, standing in front of a half-finished building, a blueprint under his arm. He was an architect, a builder of things, a man who understood structure. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. How was the bank?" Althea sat down. "It was illuminating," she said, her voice even. David knew his mother's tones. He paused. Illuminating in the academic sense, or illuminating in the someone is about to have a very bad year sense. A small, wry smile touched Althea's lips. "A bit of both, I think." She told him the story. She relayed it factually, without embellishment or emotional commentary. The teller's nervousness, the manager's arrival, the accusation, the ID in the trash, the security escort. She reported it like a field agent debriefing a superior officer. When she finished, the line was silent for a long moment. David was not a man of loud reactions. He, too, had learned discipline from his father, though his was the quiet, thoughtful discipline of a draftsman, not a soldier. "Mom," he said finally, his voice tight with a controlled anger she knew well. "I am so sorry. That is unacceptable." "It is," she agreed. "What are you going to do? Do you want me to come over? I can call a lawyer. We can sue. We can go to the press. Your announcement is in 3 weeks. This would be a nightmare for them. No, Althea said, her voice firm but gentle. No press. Not yet. This isn't about me, David. Not really. If he did this to me, a woman with resources and a title he didn't believe, who has he been doing it to for years? People who don't have a voice. People who don't have the recourse I do. That was the real thing. It had crystallized in her mind on the walk back to the car. This wasn't a personal slight to be avenged. It was a symptom of a disease. You don't treat a symptom. You cure the disease. The system that protects a man like that, she continued, thinking aloud, is a machine. It's designed to exhaust you. You file a complaint, it goes to a regional manager who protects his own. You hire a lawyer, they drown you in paperwork. You go to the press, they issue a statement about isolated incidents and employee training. The machine is designed to make you give up. So how do you beat the machine? David asked. You don't beat it, Althea said. You use its own rules, its own mechanics, to take it apart, piece by piece. With precision, she looked at the notepad on her table. The entry closed Dad's savings account was still there. She drew a neat line through it. Below, she wrote a new heading, Patriot Trust Bank. I have 20 days of leave remaining, she said, her voice now filled with a quiet energy. I think I'll use them to conduct a review. A review? An operational audit, she clarified, of a certain financial institution. I have some calls to make. But yes, David, I would like it if you came over. You can make me that chicken soup you do so well. We have work to do. After she hung up, she walked into her husband's study. It was preserved as he had left it. Books on military history and philosophy lined the walls. His desk was clean, save for a blotter and a pen set. On the wall hung his commendations, his medals, and a framed photograph of a much younger Althea and David. She ran a hand along a shelf of leather-bound books and pulled one out. It wasn't a book on economics or law. It was a thin volume, the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. David had given it to her after the funeral. She opened it to a marked page. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. She stood there for a moment, the book in her hand. Revenge was not the goal. Accountability was. Justice was. She walked back to the kitchen, the book still in her hand, and placed it on the table next to her notepad. The first call she made was not to a lawyer, or a journalist, or even a friend. It was to a number she knew from memory, a direct line to a man she hadn't spoken to in 5 years, but whose career she had followed with a quiet pride. His name was Marcus Thorne, and he was the Deputy Comptroller for Special Supervision at the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the federal agency that charters, regulates, and supervises all national banks. He had also been the best student in her graduate seminar on monetary policy and systemic risk 2 decades ago. Marcus, she said, when his assistant put her through. It's Althea Vance. I have a question for you about the operational protocols of a nationally chartered bank. The furnace was lit. The work had begun. Marcus Thorne listened without interruption. That was the first thing Althea had taught him. Listen until the other person is truly finished. He sat in his sterile government office, the Washington Monument visible out his window, and held the phone to his ear, his pen poised over a legal pad. He hadn't heard Dr. Vance's voice in years, but it was exactly as he remembered, calm, precise, with an undercurrent of formidable intelligence. As she recounted the events at Patriot Trust Bank, he didn't doodle or check his email. He just listened. He noted the facts. The time, 11:15 a.m. The location, the downtown D.C. branch. The manager's name, Mark Renshaw. The specific actions, refusal of service, baseless accusation of fraud, confiscation and disposal of a federal ID. The presence of witnesses. He underlined the phrase disposal of a federal ID twice. That wasn't just an insult. It was a potential violation of federal law regarding government property. When she finished, he was silent for a moment. He felt a familiar anger rising, the same feeling he got whenever he reviewed a case filed detailing how a powerful institution had crushed a powerless individual. But this was different. They hadn't crushed a powerless individual. They had poked a sleeping giant. Dr. Vance, he said, his voice low and serious. First, on a personal level, I am appalled and deeply sorry that this happened to you. There is no excuse for it. Thank you, Marcus. But I'm not calling for an apology, she replied. I'm calling for a professional opinion. Let's assume for a moment that I was not me. Let's assume I was Mrs. Smith from Anacostia. What would her recourse be? It was a classic Dr. Vance question. Remove the personal, focus on the principle. Her recourse would be difficult, Marcus answered honestly. She could file a customer complaint with the bank, which you've noted is an internal process. She could file a complaint with us, the OCC, or with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We would open an inquiry. We'd send a letter to the bank. The bank would respond with its version of events. It would be his word against hers. Without corroborating evidence, it would likely be closed as unsubstantiated. The machine metaphor she had used with her son was one he knew well. He lived inside it, trying to tune it for justice. And what constitutes corroborating evidence? Althea asked. A pattern of behavior, Marcus said, the word hanging in the air. Internal documents. Testimony from other customers or employees. Video. I see, Althea said. There were other people there. A young man with a phone. And an older gentleman. Good, Marcus said. A witness is a start. A pattern is a case, he paused. Dr. Vance, what do you want to happen here? I want to understand the scope of the problem, she said. This man, Renshaw, he was too comfortable. This wasn't his first time. His contempt was practiced. I want to know who else. I want to know how high the rock goes. And then I want the appropriate regulatory and legal consequences to be applied. Systemically. Marcus felt a thrill, the kind a surgeon must feel when presented with a complex but solvable case. The OCC cannot act on a single complaint with the full force of an examination without more. But an individual can gather evidence. If you were to find, say, other customers who have had similar experiences, and if they were willing to provide notarized statements, that would elevate this from a customer service issue to a potential pattern of discrimination under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act or the Fair Housing Act. That would give my office the justification we need to launch a targeted examination, pull their lending data, their complaint logs, everything. Notarized statements, Althea repeated. It was a building block. And if there were an insider, Marcus added, lowering his voice slightly, an employee willing to come forward, that changes the game entirely. Thank you, Marcus. You've given me a clear framework, she said. I have some work to do. I will be in touch when I have something substantive. Dr. Vance, he said before she could hang up. Be careful. Banks like this don't just have lawyers. They have security teams. They protect their own aggressively. I am aware, she said. My husband was a general, Marcus. I learned a thing or two about strategy. Her next stop was not a phone call, but a visit. The day after the incident, after a long evening of planning with David, she drove to a part of the city not far from her own, but with smaller houses and fewer ancient oaks. She had the name of the elderly gentleman from the bank. The security guard, the one with the kind eyes, had recognized him. That's Mr. Henderson, he'd whispered to her as they reached the door. He's been banking here since it was built. A quick search of public records gave her an address. She found James Henderson tending his roses in a small, immaculately kept front yard. He was a tall, lean man in his late 80s, with skin like dark, wrinkled parchment and eyes that had seen more than they let on. He looked up as she approached, his expression cautious. He recognized her immediately. You're the lady from the bank, he said, setting down his trowel. I am, Althea said. My name is Althea Vance. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. Not at all, he said, gesturing to a small wrought iron bench on his porch. Please, sit. They sat in the shade of the porch, the scent of roses thick in the air. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was a comfortable silence, a shared understanding. I've been a customer at that bank for 53 years, Mr. Henderson said finally, looking out at his garden. I remember when it was a place where they knew your name. Your children's names. Old man Carruthers, the first manager, he gave me my first loan to buy this house. On a handshake, he shook his head slowly. It's different now. It's a different world. Yes, Althea said quietly. It is. I saw what that man did to you, Mr. Henderson said, his gaze turning to her. It was direct and full of a deep, weary anger. It wasn't right. It was a disgrace. But I can't say I was surprised. That was the line that Althea had been waiting for. It's happened before, she stated. It wasn't a question. Mr. Henderson nodded. Different ways. Different days. But always the same tune. He looked at her, a long, appraising look. You're not going to let this go, are you? No, sir. I am not. He seemed to come to a decision. Wait here, he said, rising from the bench with a slow grace. He disappeared into the house. Althea could hear the floorboards creak, the sound of a closet door opening. He returned a few minutes later holding a simple cardboard shoebox. He sat down and placed it on the bench between them. "My wife, Clara, she passed 5 years ago," he said, his voice soft with memory. "She used to say, 'The world only remembers what's written down.' She was a bookkeeper. Believed in ledgers for everything." He tapped the top of the box. "After she was gone, I started keeping my own kind of ledger." He opened the box. It was filled, not with shoes, but with small, spiral-bound notebooks. Dozens of them. He picked one from the top. The cover was labeled, "Patriot Trust, 2015. Every time I went to the bank," he explained, "if I saw something or heard something, I wrote it down. The date, the time, the teller or manager involved, what was said, what was done." He opened the notebook. His handwriting was a beautiful, looping cursive, the kind they no longer taught in schools. January 14th, 2015. 2:30 p.m. Mr. Renshaw. Young black couple applying for a mortgage. He told them their credit was not the right fit for this bank without even running it. Told them to try a community bank in their neighborhood. March 2nd, 2015. 11 a.m. Mrs. De La Cruz trying to cash her husband's paycheck. Manager Renshaw insisted on calling her husband's employer to verify. "I've never seen them do that for anyone else." The entries went on and on, page after page, year after year. A meticulous, heartbreaking record of 1,000 small cuts. A pattern. This was it. This was the box of evidence. The kind of thing a regulator dreams of. Patient, first-hand documentation of injustice. "Mr. Henderson," Althea said, her voice thick with an emotion she rarely allowed herself. "This is extraordinary. It's just what I saw," he said simply. "I didn't know what to do with it. Who do you give something like this to? Who would listen?" He looked at her. "Clara always said the right person would come along eventually. Someone who knew what to do with the numbers." "May I?" Althea asked, gesturing to the box. "They're your numbers now," he said, pushing the box gently toward her. "You're the one who knows how to make them add up." Althea Vance drove home with the shoebox sitting on the passenger seat beside her. It felt heavier than a box of notebooks. It felt like the weight of a community's quiet suffering, now entrusted to her. She had the framework from Marcus. She had the foundation from Mr. Henderson. Now she just needed the final piece. The corroborating witness. The video. 19 days of leave remaining. The clock was ticking. 2 days passed in a blur of methodical work. Althea and David turned her quiet dining room into a war room. They bought a scanner, and David spent hours carefully digitizing every page of Mr. Henderson's notebooks. He created a spreadsheet, cross-referencing dates, names, and types of incidents. A clear, undeniable pattern emerged. Mark Renshaw's name appeared more than any other. The incidents overwhelmingly involved minority customers. Women, in particular, were often subjected to additional verification steps not applied to male customers. It was a data-driven portrait of systemic bias. "This is damning," David said, staring at the color-coded chart on his laptop screen. "This isn't an isolated incident. This is a business practice." "It's a weapon," Althea corrected him gently. "Bureaucracy used as a weapon to exclude." While David organized the past, Althea worked on the present. She drafted a formal complaint to the OCC, citing not just her own experience, but referencing a body of evidence spanning nearly a decade that she would be submitting under seal. She was building the case file brick by brick, making it too heavy for the system to ignore. On the third day, the bank responded. A crisp, cream-colored envelope arrived by courier. It was from the office of the Senior Vice President for the Mid-Atlantic region, a man named Robert Prescott, who was Mark Renshaw's direct superior. Althea opened it with a silver letter opener, a gift from her late husband. The paper was thick, expensive. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate non-apology. It began by expressing regret that her experience did not meet our high standards of customer service. It explained that Mr. Renshaw was following strict security protocols designed to protect all our clients from the growing threat of financial fraud. The letter stated that after a thorough internal review, which included an interview with Mr. Renshaw, they had concluded that his actions, while perhaps abrupt, were within policy. The most chilling line came near the end. "We consider this matter closed." There was no mention of the Federal Reserve ID, no mention of the trash can, no acknowledgement of the specific nature of her humiliation. It was a complete and total dismissal. A whitewash. "They're circling the wagons," David said, reading the letter over her shoulder. His hand rested on her shoulder, a small, grounding pressure. "Of course they are," Althea said. She felt no anger, only a cold confirmation of her theory. This is the machine protecting its own. Prescott is the mid-level protector. He's insulating Renshaw, and by extension, himself and the institution. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in a new file folder labeled Patriot Trust. Official correspondence. It was another piece of evidence. The system's denial was part of the proof of its corruption. That evening, an email arrived in her inbox. The subject line was blank. The sender was an anonymous, encrypted address. The body of the email contained a single sentence. "I was in the bank. I have the video. I don't know what to do with it." Below the text was a link to a secure file-sharing service. Althea's heart beat a little faster. This had to be the young man from the lobby, the witness. He was afraid, but he was reaching out. She clicked the link. A password prompt appeared. She thought for a moment. What would a scared college kid use? She tried Renshaw. Access denied. She tried Patriot Trust. Access denied. She paused, thinking about the event, the core of the injustice. Then she typed, Dignity. Access granted. The video file downloaded. David came to stand behind her as she double-clicked it. The screen filled with the familiar marble and strained silence of the bank lobby. The video was shaky at first, filmed from hip level, but then it steadied. It was clear. The audio was sharp. It showed the entire exchange. Her calm request, Maria's nervousness, Renshaw's arrogant approach, his condescending questions, his voice, loud and clear. This is a joke, right? You come in here with these flimsy papers and this novelty ID. And then the moment. The camera zoomed in slightly as Renshaw held up her Federal Reserve ID. The contempt on his face was plain. The theatrical toss into the trash bin. The soft clatter. It was all there. Undeniable. Visual. The video continued as the security guard escorted her out. The camera panned to Renshaw, who was watching her go, a smirk of satisfaction on his face. Then it panned to the teller, Maria, who had tears welling in her eyes. It captured everything. Althea watched it once, then a second time. She wasn't watching herself. She was watching the system at work. The bully, the victim, the frightened employee, the bystander who chose to act. All the archetypes were there, caught on a single recording. He filmed everything. David breathed, his voice a mix of awe and anger. Mom, this is the smoking gun. It's a cannon, Althea said quietly. She closed the laptop. She had the past from Mr. Henderson. She had the present from the student's phone. She had the institutional stonewalling from Prescott's letter. The case was now ironclad. She wrote back to the anonymous email address. Her reply was also a single sentence. Thank you. You have done a brave and important thing. Hold on to the original file and trust the process. The next morning, she called Marcus Thorne at the OCC. Marcus, she said, I have the pattern, and I have the video. There was a pause on the line, and she could almost hear him sit up straighter in his chair. Send it to me, he said, his voice charged with a new energy. Use the secure server I'm about to text you. We're moving from inquiry to investigation. The gears of the larger machine were beginning to turn. But there was still one piece missing. The one that would break the case wide open and take it from a problem with one branch to a rot in the entire corporate structure. The insider. And as if on cue, a second, different anonymous email arrived that afternoon. This one was from a different encrypted service. The subject line read, Teller window number 2. It was from Maria. The email from Teller window number 2 was short and terrified. I know who you are. I Googled your name. I am so sorry for what happened. Mr. Renshaw is a monster. He does this all the time. I'm afraid I'll lose my job, but I can't stay quiet anymore. Althea read the words and felt a pang of sympathy for the young woman. Maria was trapped, a low-wage employee caught between her conscience and her livelihood. She was the most vulnerable person in this entire equation, and yet she was choosing to take the biggest risk. Althea replied with care, her words chosen to reassure, not to pressure. Maria, thank you for reaching out. Your safety is the most important thing. Do not do anything that puts you at risk. Justice is a marathon, not a sprint. Maria's response came an hour later, a torrent of frantic text. He has a file, an unofficial one. He calls it the review file. Any customer he deems high risk, which is his code for Black or Hispanic or anyone with an accent he doesn't like. He puts their application in that file, and it just disappears. He tells them it's under review, but it never goes anywhere. He brags about it, says he's protecting the bank's assets. The regional VP, Mr. Prescott, knows about it. He joked about it on his last visit, called it proactive risk management. I have emails. I printed them. I have them at home. Althea stared at the screen. This was it. The link. The evidence that the rot went upstairs. It wasn't just Renshaw acting alone. It was a culture sanctioned from above. Prescott's knowledge and encouragement transformed this from a case about one bad manager into a conspiracy to violate federal anti-discrimination laws. This was the kind of evidence that brought institutions to their knees. David, she called out. Her son was in the kitchen, the comforting smell of garlic and olive oil filling the house. He was making her soup, the family anchor holding steady. He came and stood behind her, reading the email on the screen. He let out a low whistle. She's got the keys to the kingdom. She's holding a bomb, Althea said. And she's terrified. We have to handle this with extreme care. She spent the next hour composing a reply, consulting with Marcus Thorne over a secure messaging app to ensure every step was by the book. They couldn't be seen to be coercing a witness. Maria had to be acting of her own volition. Althea wrote, Maria, what you have is very important. It is evidence of a serious breach of banking regulations and federal law. If you are willing to share it, it would be protected under whistleblower statutes. No one can legally retaliate against you. I am working with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. They are the federal regulators for the bank. An investigator from their office can meet you in a safe, neutral location to receive the documents. You would be acting as a confidential informant. Your identity would be protected. The decision is entirely yours. Whatever you choose, you have my deepest respect. She sent the email and then closed her laptop. There was nothing more she could do but wait. The ball was in Maria's court. For the next 24 hours, the house was quiet. The flurry of activity had ceased, replaced by a tense stillness. The quiet before the storm. Althea found herself counting things again. The seconds on the grandfather clock in the hall. The number of steps from the kitchen to the study. Her own breaths. In, out. It was a form of meditation, a way of managing the coiled anticipation. She had set a great weight in motion, and now she had to wait for gravity to do its work. 17 days of leave remaining. David tried to distract her. He put on old jazz records. He told her stories about his latest project, a community library he was designing for a low-income neighborhood. He cooked. Meals appeared on the table as if by magic. Simple, nourishing food. A reminder of normalcy, of a life beyond this fight. They ate together in the kitchen, the box of Mr. Henderson's notebooks sitting on the corner of the table like a silent dinner guest. You seem calm, David said, watching her carefully. I am, she said. We have done the work. We have built the case. The facts are the facts. Now, the system has to do its job. I have to trust the process. She had learned a long time ago that you can't control outcomes. You can only control your preparation and your actions. The rest is in the hands of others. It was a lesson in surrender, not of will, but of ego. The next afternoon, as Althea was in the garden tending to her own roses, a small echo of Mr. Henderson's, her phone chimed with a notification from Marcus Thorne. She came in. 2 words, but they changed everything. She brought everything, the next message said. Emails, printouts of the review file log, dates, names, dispositions. It's all here. It's worse than we thought. Prescott is all over it. A wave of relief washed over Althea, so profound it almost made her dizzy. Maria had done it. The young, frightened teller had found her courage and walked into a federal building to hand over the proof. A final message from Marcus arrived. We have everything we need. A federal judge just signed the warrant. We're going in tomorrow morning. 11:15 a.m. The same time as her visit. The precision was not lost on her. It was a form of poetry. Justice, she thought, sometimes has a flair for the dramatic. That night, Althea couldn't sleep. She sat in the dark of her living room, the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds. She thought about all the players. Renshaw, puffed up with a petty authority he mistook for strength. Prescott, the cynical bureaucrat, enabling cruelty for the sake of profit. Mr. Henderson, patiently logging injustice in his shoebox. The anonymous student, using his phone as a shield and a sword. Maria, risking everything for what was right. And herself, a woman on the verge of becoming one of the most powerful financial figures in the world, who had to be brought low to remember the view from the ground. She walked to the front of the house and opened the hall closet. She took out her husband's dress shoes and the polishing kit. She sat on the floor, just as she did every Sunday, and began the ritual. The smell of the wax, the soft brush of the horsehair bristles, the slow, circular motions of the cloth. Back and forth, back and forth. With each stroke, the leather grew deeper, richer, the reflection clearer. She wasn't just polishing shoes. She was honoring a legacy of discipline. She was preparing for battle. She was making a promise to her husband's memory that the world he had fought for, a world of fairness and honor, was still worth fighting for. When she finished, the shoes shone like black glass. She placed them back by the door, perfectly aligned. She looked at the clock. It was almost morning. She went to her room, lay down, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep for the 3 hours that remained before the reckoning. Tuesday morning, 11:10 a.m. The lobby of Patriot Trust Bank was exactly as it had been a week before. The same cool, conditioned air. The same hushed reverence. The same indifferent sunlight slanting through the high windows. Maria was at her station, teller window number 2. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her face was set with a calm she didn't feel. She kept her eyes on her computer screen, avoiding the glass-walled office where Mark Renshaw was on the phone, laughing at some joke, one foot propped casually on his desk. At 11:13 a.m., 2 black sedans pulled up to the curb outside. They were unmarked, but they moved with a purpose that made pedestrians stop and watch. 4 men and 2 women in dark, conservative suits emerged and walked toward the heavy brass doors. They were led by Marcus Thorne. He looked calm, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. They entered the bank not with a crash, but with a quiet, inexorable authority. One agent, a tall woman with her hair pulled back in a severe bun, approached the security guard by the door. She spoke to him in a low voice, showing him her credentials. The guard, the same one who had escorted Althea out, looked at the ID, then at the agent, and simply nodded, stepping aside. 2 other agents fanned out, quietly informing the handful of customers that the bank was temporarily closed for a regulatory matter and asking them to conclude their business. Marcus Thorne, flanked by 2 other agents, walked directly toward Renshaw's office. Their footsteps on the marble floor were the only sound in the suddenly silent lobby. Maria watched, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Renshaw looked up from his phone call, his smile fading as he saw the 3 figures approaching his office. Annoyance flickered across his face. He held up a finger, as if to tell them to wait. Marcus didn't stop. He reached the glass door and opened it without knocking. "Mark Renshaw," he asked, though he knew the answer. Renshaw's face hardened. He ended his call abruptly. "I'm in the middle of something. Who are you?" Marcus held up his credentials. "Marcus Thorne, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. This is a federal warrant," he said, placing the document on the desk in front of Renshaw. "We are conducting an official examination of this branch, and you are the primary subject of a federal investigation into violations of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and conspiracy to commit bank fraud." The color drained from Renshaw's face. He stared at the warrant, his bravado crumbling in real time. He looked from Marcus to the other agents, who now stood blocking the doorway. The performative authority was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. The kind of fear he was used to seeing in others. I don't understand," he stammered. "This is a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong. I protect this bank. We have evidence to the contrary," Marcus said, his voice cold and flat. "We have sworn testimony, internal documents, and video evidence," he nodded to one of the agents. "Please secure all his electronic devices and files, personal and professional." Renshaw's eyes darted to his computer, then to the filing cabinet in the corner where he kept his review file. He looked like a cornered animal. "You can't do this. I'm the manager here. I have rights." "Your rights are detailed on the 2nd page of that warrant," Marcus said. "Right now, your only right is to remain silent." I suggest you exercise it. You are suspended from all duties, effective immediately. Your system access has been revoked." As he spoke, an IT agent was already disconnecting Renshaw's computer. "You'll need to be escorted from the premises," Marcus continued. "Please gather your personal belongings. A box will be provided." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. The agent who brought him the cardboard box was the same tall woman who had spoken to the security guard. Renshaw, dazed, began to robotically place items from his desk into the box. A family photo, a coffee mug, a set of golf balls, the small artifacts of a life about to be dismantled. When he was finished, Marcus gestured to the door. "We're leaving now." They walked him out of his office, through the lobby. Maria, watching from her teller window, met his eyes for a brief second. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a profound, sad finality. He looked away, his face a mask of disbelief and humiliation. As they reached the main entrance, they passed the security guard. The guard, a man Renshaw had treated with casual disdain for years, simply looked at him, his expression unreadable, and held the heavy brass door open for him. The same door he had ordered Althea thrown out of a week earlier. Outside, the sunlight seemed harsh and unforgiving. Renshaw squinted. A man pulled from a dark room into the light. The agents guided him to one of the sedans. He was not in handcuffs. This was not an arrest, not yet. But he was a man in custody, his freedom and status stripped away in a matter of minutes. As the car door closed, he looked back at the bank, at the name Patriot Trust Bank carved in stone above the door. It had been his fortress. Now it was just a building he was no longer allowed to enter. Back in her garden, Althea's phone chimed one last time. It was Marcus. "Subject is secure. We have the files. All of them. Prescott is next." Althea read the message and took a deep, cleansing breath. She looked at the white rose she had just pruned. A new bud was already forming. She snipped the rose, its stem making a satisfying little crack, and decided to take it inside. She had a vase that would be perfect for it. The reckoning was complete. The rebuilding could now begin. 16 days of leave remaining. The news broke the following Monday, the first day of the new month. It didn't come from a leak or a press conference, but from two separate, seemingly unrelated official announcements that, when placed side by side, told the whole story. The first came from the office of the Comptroller of the Currency. In a dry, formal press release, the OCC announced it had entered into a comprehensive consent decree with Patriot Trust Bancorp, the parent company of Patriot Trust Bank. The language was dense and legalistic, but the implications were seismic. The bank was being fined a staggering $150 million for widespread and systemic violations of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and other federal statutes. The decree mandated a complete overhaul of the bank's management, the establishment of a new, independent compliance committee, and the creation of a $50 million fund dedicated to community development and low-income lending in the neighborhoods the bank had systematically discriminated against. The release also noted that several employees, including senior management, had been terminated and their cases referred to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. The names Mark Renshaw and Robert Prescott were not mentioned, but their absence was a deafening roar in the financial world. The second announcement came from the White House at noon. It was broadcast on every major news network. The President of the United States stood at a podium in the Rose Garden and formally introduced the nation to the next chair of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. "It is my profound honor," the President said, "to announce my appointment of a brilliant economist, a dedicated public servant, and a woman of unshakable integrity, Dr. Althea Vance." The cameras flashed as Althea walked to the podium. She looked exactly as she had a week and a half ago in the bank lobby, composed, dignified, her blazer a familiar shade of navy blue. She stood beside the president, a picture of quiet authority. It didn't take long for the journalists to connect the dots. An enterprising reporter from the Wall Street Journal, tipped off by a source inside the OCC, broke the story that afternoon. The headline was explosive. Fed's new chair was target of bank at center of massive discrimination probe. The story laid it all out. The routine visit to close her late husband's account. The manager who called her a fraud. The Federal Reserve ID thrown in the trash. The bank's subsequent stonewalling. The article painted a portrait not of a powerful woman seeking revenge, but of a system of injustice that had inadvertently picked a fight with the one person who had the skill, the integrity, and now the power to hold it accountable. Patriot Trust Bancorp's stock plummeted 20% by the closing bell. The CEO, a man who had spent his career on corporate jets and at Davos, announced his early retirement by sundown. The machine, so impervious and powerful, had been brought to a shuddering halt. For Althea, the day was a whirlwind of public duties and private reflections. After the press conference, she had a series of briefings at the Eccles Building, the headquarters of the Federal Reserve. As she walked its marble halls for the first time as the incoming chair, she was struck by the similarity to the bank lobby. The same soaring ceilings, the same cold, polished stone. But here, the feeling was different. This was a place of public trust, not private profit. It was a machine she was now tasked with running, and she was more determined than ever to ensure it ran for everyone. Late that evening, she finally returned home. David was there, waiting for her on the porch. He had a bottle of champagne on ice and 2 glasses. He had been watching the news all day, a proud, quiet smile on his face. He poured the champagne. "To the chair," he said, raising his glass. Althea clinked her glass against his. "To Dad," she said softly. "He would have liked to see this." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping the champagne, listening to the crickets begin their nightly chorus. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the lawn. A notification lit up Althea's phone. It was an email with the subject line, "Thank you." It was from the student who had sent her the video. "I'm studying to be a journalist," the email read. "I learned more this week than in any class. You showed me that one person doing the right thing can make a difference. Thank you for trusting me." Another email was from a name she didn't recognize. Maria Gonzalez. The teller. "Dr. Vance, I quit the bank. The OCC investigator helped me get into a paralegal program. I start next month. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." And a final message, a text from an unknown number. "The roses look beautiful this year. Clara would be proud. J.H." Althea showed the messages to David. He read them and shook his head in wonder. "You didn't just take down a bank, Mom," he said. "You built something. You built hope for all these people." She didn't feel like a giant slayer. She felt like a gardener. Someone who had seen a patch of earth choked with weeds and had simply done the hard, necessary work of pulling them out, one by one, so that something better could grow. The resolution wasn't the punishment of Renshaw or Prescott. It was Maria starting a new career. It was Mr. Henderson feeling seen. It was a young journalist finding his purpose. It was a $50 million fund that would build homes and businesses where there had once been only rejection. The victory wasn't the fall of the powerful. It was the rise of the just. 1 month later, on a crisp autumn Saturday, Althea found herself driving downtown. She was on her way to a meeting, but she had left early. On impulse, she took a detour and parked in the same garage she had used that fateful morning. She walked the 2 blocks to Patriot Trust Bank. From the outside, it looked the same imposing stone facade, the same brass doors. But a new, temporary banner hung above the entrance, under new management, committed to serving our entire community. She saw a young black couple with a baby stroller walk up to the doors, hesitate for a moment, and then go inside. Through the glass, she saw them being greeted not by a teller behind a barrier, but by a woman in a suit who came out to shake their hands and lead them to a comfortable seating area. The branch manager was a woman now, an African-American woman Althea knew by reputation from a smaller, well-respected community bank. The OCC had overseen her appointment. Maria's old position at teller window number 2 was now occupied by a young man with a kind smile. Althea didn't go in. She didn't need to. She had seen enough. She stood on the sidewalk, a quiet observer, and felt a sense of peace settle over her. The kind of peace that comes not from victory, but from restoration. The world was not perfect. The machine of injustice was vast and would always need watching. But today, in this one place, the gears had been reset. The air was different. The light felt warmer. She turned and walked back toward her car, the city's hum a familiar, comforting song. Just the road and the engine and the morning air. That evening, she and David sat on her porch again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Her late husband's polished shoes stood by the door, their reflection capturing the last of the day's light. They were a reminder of where she had come from, of the discipline and love that had shaped her. David handed her a steaming mug of tea. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About Dad," she said, her voice soft. "He always said that true strength wasn't about how loudly you shouted, but about how steadfastly you stood your ground. About the dignity you refused to surrender." She looked out at the darkening sky. The fight had been necessary. The accountability had been essential. But this, right here, was the purpose of it all. This quiet moment. This small pocket of peace. The ability to sit on your own porch, in your own home, and watch the day end, secure in the knowledge that you had done right by your principles, by your community, and by the memory of those you loved. Dignity, she thought, was not the absence of humiliation. It was the quiet, unyielding grace with which you rose after you had been brought low, and the wisdom to use that experience not to build a wall around yourself, but to build a bridge for others. She took a sip of her tea. It was warm and sweet. The first stars were beginning to appear in the vast, quiet sky. Her work was just beginning. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.